Welcome back, listeners. I am very excited because this week on the Writer's Advice podcast, we are joined by screenwriter of both TV, movie, and playwright, and her brand new memoir, It's Not a Pity Memoir, Abi Morgan. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Lovely to be on.
Thank you. Now, I want to start, there's so much I want to dive into with general writing with you, but when did you first know that you were a writer?
Really late, actually. I mean, I wasn't one of those kids who kind of kept a notebook and constantly wrote down my feelings, or I was very academically challenged, I would say. I really, really, really hated school. In fact, my biggest memory and my reoccurring nightmare is waking up and I've forgotten to go to school, and it's because I basically never showed up. So I very quickly kind of I didn't fit into the kind of system. I didn't even have that English teacher who loved me, or but I had one teacher who just, whenever we did projects, you know, when in primary school, and which involved oral storytelling, that was where I sort of excelled. And it really came from what I didn't really write. I think what I realized is I loved the kick of the punchline, the plot twist, the dramatic moment. And so I was a real fabricator of stories when I was very young. And, you know, it would I would often have a really good story, you know, the cat had died, but it would be the cat died, and then, you know, I had to run in and save it. And the story would just get bigger and bigger and bigger. And I was a terrible liar. And it was quite funny because I came from a sort of what would be considered relatively glamorous background in terms of both my parents were in theatre and they had quite a lot of famous friends. And I used to tell people that my dad was a policeman and that we had a German Shepherd dog. And I remember being rumbled when some girls came to my house and were like desperately looking for this dog. So I think very early on, I told lies. And I think that was where I realized that I loved an audience and I loved storytelling. But it really was, honestly, it wasn't until I eventually did go to university. I took a year out, I retook some exams to get back in, and I did an English and drama degree. And I did that thing of, you know, first year I was the color of the wallpaper. I mean, I don't think anyone noticed me. And then towards the end of the second year, we had to write a monologue and perform it. And I am no actor, I will tell you. I mean, I did a year acting and I'm so bad. I don't have the ability to transform. But what I really noticed when I did this we've got I mean, you probably know him, but very well known British playwright, brilliant writer called Alan Bennett. Amazing. And he writes beautiful character studies of Brits, really, and the sort of quirks of what it means to be British. And so I did this little monologue based on a woman that I'd seen on a train. And I heard that thing which I heard when I was a kid, when I'd go in and go, the cat died. People would look and listen. And I heard the thing that everybody, I think, looks for, or writers look for, particularly if you come from theatre, which is you listen for the silence. And it's the silence of listening. And I think that was when I thought, oh, okay, I can find a way to get an audience to listen. I can't, if I get up on it, if I perform, I'm useless. If I, you know, try and flirt, I'm crap. If I try and do any other, the kind of normal ways we interact, but what I could do was tell a story. And so it began orally, and then I started to write. And so that was really, it took me till I was in my early 20s, really. And then I had that great revelation, which I think most writers have, which was, you know, I could spend all day on my own, and yet in my head I traveled. And so it's still the thing that gives me a kick. In fact, just before I sat down today, I was like, why do I feel good today? And I thought, oh my gosh, I've got no meetings beyond this podcast. I'm on my own all day, and tomorrow my kids are away and I'm going to write on a Saturday. And I felt this buzz of like, oh, I can't wait, you know. So I still get that kick. I mean, I also get that, oh God, I've got to write today. But, you know, it's yeah. So that's a very long answer to a very simple question. But yeah, that's the answer, really.
No, that's really beautiful. And I absolutely love that. It is such a writer's feeling of like, oh my God, I've got a free day. Like, oh my gosh, my plans are cancelled. Like, how amazing. Like it's,
I must have been the only person who kind of enjoyed COVID. I think there was a sort of, you know, as well as it being a terrible global tragedy. And the other part was I was slightly annoyed that everybody suddenly understood what I'd known all along, which is it's really fun to not get out of your pajamas all day. You know, it's really fun. There is something really great to have your fridge really close to your desk. And actually, you know, the thing that still baffled me, I did a work placement when I was 17 in a publishing company, cool, brilliant, amazing publishing company. again, I felt like the color of the wallpaper. I couldn't literally communicate. And I remember thinking there was no way I will be able to be in an office like this. It's just not going to work for me. So I think also if you're someone who is naturally antisocial, it's your natural domain, really.
Yeah.
So I totally get that. I totally get that. I think it's a very particular thing, actually.
Yeah. But at the same time, you know, you have to understand, particularly you have to understand people so well at the same time. Like, you're creating characters, you know, and you're not really alone. I guess you're kind of spending it writing all day with your characters. But when was your first moment when you're like, oh, this is really working, you know, when you've your screenwriting, your playwriting, when you're like, yeah, this is really my thing after you've studied?
It's really funny, actually, because when I first left, I mean, I didn't earn money from writing until I was in my late 20s, early 30s. And I was watching my friends become doctors and lawyers and, you know, being brilliant and paying for dinner for me. And, you know, and I was, you know, I kept on thinking I'm going to be the oldest waitress in town. And so I did a lot of waitressing, a lot of looking after empty buildings. But I worked on a play and I literally rewrote the first page again and again and again. And the reason why I was able to do this, a lot of what really helped me is I did a combination. I waitress, but I also got this amazing job with a large company. I won't name them, but they own loads of empty properties. They're a large corporation, and the woman who was in charge of all their properties as they were downsizing had all these empty office buildings, and she needed someone to occasionally be there to show people around rentals. And I went, you know, I want to write. And she went, I don't care what you do. You've got a computer, do it. Just occasionally, if you've got a kind of group of German businessmen, you know, walk them around the building and talk about the truncating system. And so I would kind of do this. I did this for 5 years and it was amazing. And I basically worked on one play. And I kid you not, I rewrote the first page. I didn't go past the first page, probably for the first 18 months. And what I realized in that rewriting and writing and rewriting of that first page, I was actually mentally plotting out the whole play. So I think that was that was weirdly my kind of apprenticeship. But what I do remember very clearly is I remember writing, it was my third play, and I used to write for competitions and I'd never win, but I'd get through to the last three so I'd always be standing by the writer who won. But it gets you noticed, but also it sets deadlines. And, you know, that's what, you know, it's both our blessing and curse. We need, you know, I like to set deadlines that I constantly miss, but at least I like to have them in the sand. But it was about my third play, and I got my first sort of proper commission from a new playwriting company. And I wrote it very quickly, but I remember my mum was staying with me. And this is, you know, aged in my late 20s. I remember she was in the kitchen. I remember I went and sat on her lap. This sounds so bizarre. I've never ever actually told anyone this. And I was shaking. And I was like, and it was because for the first time ever, I thought, I think I've written something good. And it was terrifying. I was like a kid again. I was like, oh my. And it was like I was presenting some work. And I think that was the moment where I thought, no, I think I've actually written something. Listen, in that moment, we all think we're Samuel Beckett or Arthur Miller or, you know, August Wilson or any other. I must mention a female playwright. Why is my brain gone dead? Carol Churchill. But and you totally think, but actually, and you know, most of writing is a process of failure. I very quickly realized it was a thoroughly average play, but I knew I could do it. And I think that was weirdly my moment in my kitchen with my mom going, oh my God, I'm feeling sick with nerves, but I've done it. I've finished something. Because, you know, I always say what I say to people who want to write is, writers are just the writers who write. And actually, there's lots of people who want to be writers, but, you know, nothing comes of nothing. You have to, even if it's crap, most of what I write is crap. I think most of the time you're just sifting for pearls, and you'll spend the whole day and you'll have sifted and sifted and you still don't get a pearl. And then what you don't realize is through that sifting, you're clearing the silt because there's a pearl under there somewhere, you know? So yeah. I guess that, you know, it was the first taste of going, shit, I found a pearl. Yeah. You know, I found a master, you know?
Yeah, that's
very
amazing.
low value pearl. It was a very low value pearl. I don't think, but you know, in that moment, it meant a lot. You know, it was probably fool's gold, but it was a good moment. You know,
that's so beautiful. And then when you have that, you know, it creates that momentum that keeps it going. Like, yes, okay, I can do this. I can keep this going.
Totally.
And before your memoir, did you ever think about writing before in like in like author form?
Do you know what? I really cringe because my mum's best friend is a very brilliant, established author, novelist. And I remember when I was about 17, being around the supper table, her and her husband are both novelists. And I remember going, yeah, I might write a novel. Yeah, I'm going to work on a novel. Yeah, I'm going to write one. And I look back now and I remember they went, oh, okay, you're looking forward to reading it. Oh my gosh, it's the hard. I mean, that kind of long form prose is so different. I mean, so no, I never thought of writing I thought when I was 16 of writing a book, and then I realized how damn hard it was. And it's a very interesting thing, isn't it? What we choose to write for, what format we choose to write for, to use that sort of TV term. And I sometimes think, why did my ideas have more naturally fallen into screenwriting? And if I'm really honest, it's a combination of there's a natural affinity for me between the leanness of screenwriting and image making.
Yeah.
But it's also economics.
Yeah.
Which was, I just couldn't make money from playwriting early on, and certainly not enough to raise children on. And
yeah.
And, you know, I was with an out of work actor. So I think the idea of the novel, I associated that with something, you know, where you live in your garret in Paris, and it always felt like the impossible dream, and it still does. I mean, to be a novelist, I think it's incredible, you know. And anyway, listen, I'm going to go off piste. You've got to just keep reining me in.
I really want to get into the memoir, because I have so many questions to ask you on that. But I actually don't know how this works now in screenwriting or playwright. How were you first, what first inspires you for an idea that you're like, yes, I want to jump on that? And are you still coming up with new ideas, or now how established you are, you're kind of been given ideas to go with? How does it work that way?
Well, weirdly, I mainly work on my own ideas, and I often, you know, I'm learning. I call it a dog whistle. I talk about it as the dog whistle, which is I'm waiting with any project, and that includes my own. I'm waiting for that moment where something which is inaudible to the sort of average ear, but something internal makes you prick up, and you kind of go, I can hear this, and there'll be an internal prick up of the ears of someone else as well. And I look for that, and there are sometimes projects which I have taken because I know it's a cool book, or it's an amazing director, or there's an amazing actress attached, but I never really got that dog whistle. And 9 times out of 10, that thing will never get made, or even if it is, it's not something which is, it's probably not the thing I should have done. The older I've got, the less I know the shape of how projects work. And of course, these things change, but I can sort of average out a shape. So I can look at my life, you know, I'm 54 next week, and I was like, okay, you know, how do I want to spend the next decade? What do I want to do, you know, in this next period? And so I think quite carefully about what I want to do. But on the whole, it tends to be my own ideas. And often, you know, I do adaptation of books. I'm blown away by a book and hugely admiring. And I also, it's such an act of recreation, but also preservation of what everyone has loved in a book, or what is essential to the novelist. And sometimes it's been quite interesting. I enjoy liberating myself from that. I enjoy being freer. So on the whole, I tend to work on my own stuff. But, you know, funny enough, I've been circling an idea for a play, which I was then like, no, it's definitely, I'm going to do it as a TV show. And weirdly, I've just spent the last few months going to the theatre on my own, which I never normally do, which I've absolutely loved, and sitting in those kind of, you know, those like sleepy Thursday afternoon matinees or session afternoon where you are literally the youngest person in the audience. And I've been like, oh my gosh, theatre's great. How much do I love theatre and the intimacy of it? And so there's a sort of, I'm suddenly starting to get that new filter of like, oh, I think I want to write a play now. I think I will. So I sort of wait and listen, and often I get inspired by those around me, you know, and I think, oh gosh, that's beautiful. I love Susie Miller. I just got to know her, the playwright, and she's such a force of nature and such a giver and such a lovely, generous, you know. I've one of the things I've really enjoyed hitting my 50s is I feel like I'm meeting this generation of women of my age who, particularly weirdly amongst playwriting and novel writing again, because I spent a lot of time with screenwriters, so generous, so warm, so open, so interested in storytelling, that's been very inspiring. So I tend to focus on my own ideas, but I do look and think, how many ideas have I got in me that I can execute and deliver? So I get more strategic, because there's nothing worse than backtracking out of a project when you've taken money or people are relying on you. So I just choose those things really carefully now.
Yeah, yeah. And oh my gosh, that is so beautiful. How do you know when, like, say you've got an idea and you're like, no, this would be best for a play, or this would be best for film, or this would be best for, I guess, is it the same thing? It's that ear prick of like, this is the best way to bring this story to life. Like,
Yeah, I mean, I think there are sometimes there's the kind of there are pressure. You know, someone's offered me recently a really beautiful short story, and what I battle with is that the money around it is Hollywood money, but I still think it's a small film and it doesn't need that much money on it. It needs something simpler, smaller. So I sometimes have those kind of dynamics going on, and I think, no, I want to preserve this. I don't want this to be. I mean, interesting, you know, we'll get to my memoir, but one of the things I'm thinking about in screen form, how do I do that? What do I want to do with that? You know, and what I want to make it, you know, I think sometimes I want something that's very quiet, very modest, but powerful. You know, TV brings a whole other pressure to it, particularly now we're in this extraordinary, you know, streamer age. I went to the cinema on Sunday again on my own, and I was the only person in the cinema. And I was like, please don't tell me cinema is dying. And I thought, no, the thing is, it was a sort of small indie film. And I thought, these are the films that are really tricky at the moment, you know, or even the mid-range films that are tricky, the big blockbusters, even the art house maybe, but there's something about those mid-range indie films that are tricky that I don't know if they'll survive. So that thing of film and TV, that's the blur I find quite tricky now. And where do these films fit, you know? Because there is still something magical we know about being in the cinema, for example. But I don't know, there's no, you know, even chaos has a form. There is a kind of form somewhere in this chaos, but I'm quite kind of instinctive led. And then also I'm inspired by the people, you know, what I love about screenwriting is it's such a massive collaboration. And, you know, I talk about it, I never know if I'm the birth mother or the surrogate, but somewhere along the line, you never own the script. You know, when you sign that contract, you give your script over. That's the revelation. So I treat the script quite lightly as a collective. So my job is to author it and drive it through, but I am part of a collective. So often it will be that a collective that will pick up the idea and I get inspired and will grow with that idea, you know. But at the beginning, it's often, you know, my danger is I gabble. So I might be in a meeting with someone and I've just got into a chat, and by the end I'll have sold a film, and I'd be like, I think that was going to be a play, you know. And so sometimes those things just evolve, you know, just up, you know. Someone said, one of the things I say to the writers, wait for your jam. And what I mean for that, jam is like, I don't know if you have like jelly, I think maybe in America. Wait for your jam, which is you know, I often mentor young writers, which I really love. Or I mentor writers, that's what I'm trying to do, because I think there's also this dearth of writers in their 40s, 50s, 60s that never got a chance, which I'm sort of interested in at the moment. But anyway, I mentor writers, and one of the things I say to writers, they go, I've got this great idea, and I'll go, great, don't tell me till it's ready. You can't have your jam yet, because if I give you jam, you won't write it. And so this is the thing, I tell writers, don't talk out your ideas too much, because sometimes you need the kind of carrot of gratification at the end. And that doesn't mean you don't come to me and say, I've got a problem with there's this character. That's a different mechanism. What I'm talking about is, don't pitch me every minute. Pitch it to yourself, work it on yourself, and then get ready to pitch, and then you'll get your jam. Because I think there are certain points where writers need their jam. Early on, you need your jam. It's like having children. You need to keep going. You need to keep tending. You need to keep watering. You need to keep nurturing. But there's a point you're going to go, no, you need to grow a little bit. I'm going to step back now, because you can do this. You need to grow a bit longer. You're getting out, you know. So I turn that on myself as well, which is I try and, you know, I hold back my ideas a bit more and try and let them brew a bit more as well internally and percolate.
Yeah, absolutely. That is really, really beautiful advice. I love that. Okay, so the memoir. This was just, honestly, it's one of my favorite reads. And sorry, am I saying it's not a pity memoir? It's not a pity memoir. I am saying that right? Is it not? That's not it.
No,
it's so beautiful.
It's not a pity memoir.
It's not.
I love you that, because someone said to me the other day, I love this is not a putsy memoir. And I was like, no, it's a or some of the people say it's a pity, it's a memoir. That's the other one I get a lot of. So don't worry.
I don't know if that's not, but it's not a pretty memoir. Honestly, it is one of the best love stories that I have ever wrote. And I've ever read, I haven't wrote it. But there was so many, when you're reading something like that, I read, you know, you read as a reader, but you also read as a writer as well. And there were so many moments in there that it begged so many questions in me. I would love to know when this started in the process for you. Like, did you at any point, firstly, I'll get you to chat on what it's about a little bit more to the audience. No, you don't want to?
Yeah. I'm going, no, yes.
Yeah,
I'm
I'll get you
listening.
to chat about a little bit more.
Spill my guts on the page, yeah.
I'd love to know, where in the process you started writing it. Like, was this more of something therapeutic to you, or you know, was it years on after, through a lot of the experiences that you're like, I need to get this out? How did it all start for you?
Well, I mean, there are two things going on. I guess the first story is that, you know, Jacob, my partner of like 18 years, collapsed with a brain seizure, and so ensued, you know, a sort of crazy, what is now 4 years since this happened, of kind of medical catastrophe that hit myself and my Jacob and our family and our children. And really the book tries to capture the kind of mad craziness of what happens when somebody goes through a medical catastrophe and comes back very fundamentally changed, and how you recalibrate and find your way back together. And I didn't set out to write a memoir. It was certainly not in my head. You know, but what basically happened was Jacob came out. Jacob was in a coma for nearly 7 months, and then basically came out of hospital 15 months later. And you know, he's was an actor, and so, you know, there's the home is, you know, filled often with creative storytelling and pitching, and my teenagers have got used to me pitching ideas. And so when Jake first came back, one of the things that Jacob had was an inability to initiate, or he was very linguistically brilliant, he just couldn't initiate any kind of conversation or even action. And so when I used to look at Jake across the dinner table, and I'd think, how am I going to get you to talk? How am I going to get you out there again? But the one thing he was very drawn to is music. He loved music. He loves movies. He loves, you know, and so he would play the ukulele, and he paralyzed his left hand, so he learned how to play it in a different way. And I'd listen to him playing the ukulele, and I'd think, I want him to feel the audience applause him. That was really it. So I had this crazy idea. I was like, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to write a play about Jacob, about the story of what's happened to Jacob. And I'm just going to write about what's happened, because I'm spilling over with sadness and terror and rage and relief and more terror. And how am I going to not be frightened of this? And how am I going to hold my nerve in front of my kids? And how am I going to make something which has been so brutal to us as a family? I'm not going to give away too much, because actually what I realize is I tell everyone the story of the book, and in some ways it's kind of interesting to find out, but how am I going to get us through this brutal experience? I know I'll do something which has always made me feel good, which is and has been affirming to me, and I will make something of it. We will make something of it, and Jake will be in it, and it'd be amazing. And we have this incredible industry of like psychotherapists and speech and language and physio, and I will get them, and they will come and work with us in rehearsal, and I'll get actors playing them, and our best mutual male friend Jacob and mine looks just like Jacob, and they're always competing for each other in auditions, and I'll get Guy to play Jake, and this is going to be amazing, this is so exciting. And so I go to a theatre and I pitch it, and they go, we love it, it's amazing, it's great. And I'm like, we're going to make a piece of theatre, forgetting one of two things. One is Jake was too ill to do that, which that was the fantasy. And the second thing was lockdown happened. And as lockdown happened, and as we, you know, the world, we kind of had that in the UK, we were just, it was like March, I think it was like March 2020. That first lockdown was kind of, okay, we'll do it in 6 months' time, this theatre piece. I'll make sourdough, I'll do my vegetable garden. You know, it was a kind of quite, you know, terrifying, sad pandemic was hitting the world, and I was watching everyone else go through their own inner pain. But it was quite okay, and we were adjusting as a family, and it was probably a year, you know, 9 months in, Jake was home, and we were finding our way back together, and I'd gone through my own sort of medical issues in the middle of it all. And then winter hit, and we went into another lockdown, and I could feel this cloud coming over me, and it was the hardest period as well, with Jacob's rehab and us as a family. How do you bring someone and integrate each other? How do we come back together again? I've got two at the time they were 14 and 16, my children. How do I bring them all back together, and how do I keep my own sanity? And so literally I did that thing, which I remember reading J.K. Rowling, or, you know, there's authors I admire who kind of go, the kids would go to bed and I would just sit at the kitchen table and write. And I'd be like, how do you do that? Because I mainly lie on the sofa, eat a lot of chocolate and watch crap. But for the first time ever, I did do that. I just, and it was, you know, I read a couple of books about writing memoirs. I mean, in fact, I read the first page of writing memoirs and they all went, writing a memoir is not therapy. And I go, it's not therapy. It was kind of therapy, I guess. But I just had to, it was so frightening what was happening, because really one of the key things that is at the heart of the book is probably the prism of the way you look at your life through the eye of a screenwriter. But also it's about identity, because for various reasons, Jacob's identity, my identity was really challenged during the course of it, and the identity of our relationship. And so I didn't set out to write a love story. I love love stories. I mean, Nora Ephron is like one of my favorite screenwriters. But I just had to try and make sense of what was happening to us as a family. And the way I did that was I started to dive back into the 18 years I'd spent with Jacob and how we'd met and the highs and lows of our relationship and who he was and who we were as a couple and how we were going to find our way back. And so I wrote it in a very sort of like a few weeks, really. I wrote it intensely for a few weeks, and it was edited and changed and obviously evolved. But it was so liberating for me to have that prose, because, you know, with screenwriting, I write very quickly and I do lots of drafts, and I will write. I'm very fortunate. I have a strong creative team around me, brilliant creative team. But if I write on the Monday, they will have read by Monday night and come back with notes on Tuesday. And what I had forgotten was that internal voice of myself. No one was around. No one was interested in listening. And in fact, the person who read for me is my sister, who works with me now. And so I was feeding her chapters every time I'd finish it, saying, can you read this? And she would just go like that to me, keep going like that. And I go, okay. And I think she could see what was happening, which was I was somehow trying to lock down, make sense, find chaos within the form of this crazy experience. And I'm so grateful that it was in the form of prose, because screenwriting is incredible. I mean, I think if I was a novelist, a proper writer, I would say, a proper novelist, proper memoirist, I would have got this. But as a screenwriter, it is all maths. It is all about structure. I kind of went, don't worry about that, just because I don't know how to write prose, just write it. And I wrote it in a very different way. And lots of screenwriting is about what you take out. Really, I think most of screenwriting is about negative space, and it's about the visual and it's about language, but really it's about the space to allow an audience to feel. It's like theatre.
Yeah.
With memoir writing, I just was like, I'm telling you my story. I don't know how this is coming out, but I've got to tell you this story because I think there's something in it. So would you come with me, because I'm trying to make sense of this terrifying, heartbreaking, profoundly sobering experience. And so it was the one time I felt like my inner writing genie. I felt so grateful. I felt so grateful that somewhere I'd found this genie very early on, this thing that if I could touch, if I could rub, it would wake up and go, okay, what's your wish today? What do you want to do? And I think it stood with me and it ran with me when I went through the worst experience. And I am so grateful. I'm grateful that I grew up in a creative household where my mum would say, tell me about it. I'm grateful about the friends, the amazing Jacob, my partner, you know, my editors who've kind of listened to me, because it allowed me to go have that internal voice going, okay, I'm listening now. You're on your own, I'm listening. And so keep going. And so it was a very liberating experience. But as I've said before, and you come up with these kind of slightly hokey lines when you do a lot of press on something, but it is true. I did wake up, and I do feel like now it's like that feeling when you've got horribly drunk, you've had a really good time, but the next day you go, what the hell did I say? Oh my God. And I do think I wrote it in a kind of fugue, and I think it has that. You know, I've heard the gamut of like praise and criticism of it, and one of the things is, a friend said to me, it's like an emotional vomit. And I was like, oh my God, yeah, I kind of get it. But the other side is there is I'm also I'm a structuralist. I have to do structure. And so what was interesting for me was there is a kind of structure to it that was coming. It was like the writing arm was there, the screenwriter was there, the editor was there. And so it's a strange relationship between my own internal editor kind of helping make and shape a piece of free-flowing, very kind of, I mean, people say to me, my God, it's like you write about everyone else's life. And one of the things that has been very reassuring to me when the book first went out, because one of the things I struggle with is whose story is it? You know, because it was my publisher who went, it's a love story, you know, you've written a love story. And I went, really? Do you think I have? And it's taken me a long time to realize that. But it was Jacob when the book was going out and I was so frightened about it. And I said, I feel really wobbly today, Jake. I don't know what I've done. And he went, well, you spent your whole life writing about everyone else. You should write about yourself now. And it was really important to me. He said that because I struggle about whose story it is, you know, whose story is this? And I come to see that it's a kind of every story, but it's my story about what's happened. So very unique experience. I don't know if I've got I certainly don't think I've got another memoir in me. I'd be quite grateful if I have nothing worthy of another memoir. But I felt very grateful and fortunate that it was my natural domain to put words are my natural, words are my comfort. And if you come to my house, my walls are covered with less art and more posters, images, words. I love words. So words are my communicator, my savior, I guess. Yeah, I guess.
Yeah. And I definitely did not find it an absolute word vomit at all, to the point it was so beautiful and free flowing, and just like, you know, obviously what you've gone through is such a rare freak experience, but you put just such a depth of emotion that so many people could relate to in so many different areas and things that they've gone through. And you do, like your words, you have single sentences in there that's just like, oh, like stabs you with beauty. Like I absolutely loved it. And I recommend this book for everyone. But what you were just talking about, I was so interested because coming from like being a screenwriter, you know, that to then put this memoir out there, it's vulnerable. Like it's a really beautiful, vulnerable experience. And you've put so much of yourself into it.
Well, you know, I circle that quite a lot, but I think, I think, you know, it's quite interesting. I look very different than I did. You know, I look at myself, I'm one breast down, I've got very little hair. I felt like I was in my mid 40s having a great time. And I suddenly am in my mid 50s going, where did that go? What happened? You know, we were obliterated. Jacob was obliterated. My children were obliterated. Our families were obliterated. We couldn't have been more vulnerable. But, you know, to use the kind of Brene Brown idea of the power of vulnerability, there is like nowhere else to go. The only thing you can do is go, yeah. And one of the things that people say to me, my God, you've been so open. And I'm like, yeah. And then I got back on with the rest of my life. And I actually feel like the experience was so much more, you know, more exposing, so much more brutal. And one of the things I think about a lot, I was reading Nora Ephron did a really interesting article, and she was talking about the relationship with her mother. Her mother was, I think her parents were screenwriters, certainly in the industry. And her mother was the one who coined the phrase, everything's material. It's her kind of phrase. And she was talking about her mother, and she said, you know, for a long time, I didn't really understand what my mother meant by this. So, but what I come to realize is, and I'm going to badly paraphrase this, so sorry, RIP Nora Ephron, but she basically said, you know, when you slip on a banana skin, like everyone laughs. As a writer, you want to write about the fact, you know, you've slipped on a banana skin, and you want to analyze why you've slipped on a banana skin, and you want to talk about why you've slipped on a banana skin, and you want to go, I know I've slipped on a banana skin. And I guess that's what the memoir is about. It's like, it's about trying to convert the idea that there is there's no pity in this, you know, like, I wish this hadn't happened to us. And I think if you read the book, I think the word is right. It was a freak experience. There are layers to the experience and bad plot twists where I was like, oh my God, no, seriously, this is happening. It was like a bad drama. But it is not without its gifts. And I guess the biggest gift is the way you have to expand your emotional, you know, your emotional muscle, and also confront the biggest deadline of all, which I've talked about, which is the one I had failed to, you know, recognize, which is it's death, you know. And I think both Jacob and I really stared death in the face, and certainly Jacob did, and I was kind of behind him. And it's, you know, that's very sobering. And so, yeah, and yeah, it's raw, and it's, I'm one person, it's such a small life. I'm so deeply, the one thing I take away from this is I'm so unimportant in the world, and that is so great. I should be unimportant in the world, because, and it's made me very liberated about the fact, you know, I mentor young writers and I mentor writers, and I'm always going, I love your work, but inside there's a little part of me going, oh my God, they're better than me, I've got to work harder. And now I feel like, great, you know what I mean? I feel more like, I genuinely feel like, good, yeah, do it, because I'm just so grateful to be standing. I'm so grateful my kids are okay, and they're going off to college, and they're in love, and they're getting pissed, and they're happy. And I'm so grateful that we got Jacob home, and I'm grateful I'm alive. So, you know, I'm like, I'm so grateful you respond like that. You know, occasionally I see this, there was a great, like, because, you know, I look on Amazon and I see if it's selling or not. And I, you know, I read those terrible reviews, and someone put 1 star and they put, nothing happens. There's nothing, and they went, literally, there's no plot twist. And I was like, okay.
So they didn't read it. They definitely didn't read it.
The point is, you the 5 star, and you're like, the 5 star, you're like, oh, that's great, but that wears off. It's the 1 star you search for, you know. So there's always that inner critic. But actually, I feel that, you know, the biggest thing is when people do say, I mean, you know, people say this hokey stuff, don't they? I was just so touched, and, you know, but the truth is, it's genuinely, what's been great is people haven't told me about their husbands collapsing with their brain seizures. They've told me about the fact they're not happy about the way they look, or they've told me about the fact that they ran home and hugged their husband who they'd been fighting with all day, or they say to me, God, I want a friend like that, or they say to me, like, God, you got lucky. And I, you know, I have a very normal marriage now with Jacob, no plot twist, not plot spoiler, we got married, but after like nearly 20 years together. But I feel so grateful that I got to write our story, this story, you know. And the irony is, I wrote it, the memoir is written, you see, again, my terrible dyslexia, first, third, which person is it? But, you know, I write between the he and the you, and I'm often the you is Jacob, and I'm talking to him. The one person, the one audience I wrote it for him, the one person who hasn't read it, will never read it, probably, is Jacob. Because Jacob has always been like, I love what you do, I'm not interested with, let's get on and do our lives. And also, it happened to him, and it's a big thing. But he has been so like, it's so cool you wrote it, it's so cool, you've got to do it, it's so, writing, expressing yourself is so important. And I say that to any writer, you know, like, just get it down, because it's expression and it's communication, and somebody will read it and someone will connect with it. And I felt so inspired, the amount of novels that I've read that I haven't read before. I talk about in the book how I tend to read book reviews and pretend I've read the books, and then I actually convince myself I've read the book, and kind of go, did I ever read that book? And I realize I've just read the book review. Now I'm reading books again, and I'm loving it. And suddenly that thing of realizing actually what everyone's trying to do is just communicate. And that's exciting. And that's why I feel so grateful to be what we're doing what we're doing, because